the real benefit of Hydra heads is that you can scale them up in parallel. So you can spin up multiple in parallel or sort of scale it horizontally, which means that for every Hydra head you have open, you would have 1,000 TPS. So, the reasoning goes, if you have 1,000 of them, you would have 1,000,000 TPS.
Okay, so there is a misunderstanding in the Cardano community about what Hydra really does.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, to put it lightly, okay? And so the first thing I would like to ask you is to clear up the, Cardano will do million, billion, bajillion TPS when Hydra goes live.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the first there's multiple misconceptions in exactly that statement, right? That you presented, and the first of them is like when Hydra goes live. Hydra's been live for a year. You go figure. You can use it right now on mainnet. It's there. Everything's open source. You can go to on the topic of reading, hydra.family is the website where you can read about Hydra. We just revamped the landing page, so it's a little bit more approachable for people. But that aside, this thing is live. We did a demo at Rare Evo with the Hydra Doom thing. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later as well. But this thing has been live for a while, right? It's not canceled. It's not some faraway future. It's here already. We're expanding it. We're adding to it. We're developing it. But it is currently usable in the form that it is right now, right? So, and it's a scaling solution for Cardano. So Cardano has scaling already. We have a lot of scaling plans, like layouts and a lot of these other things that are coming down the line along with partner chains. But we already have Hydra, right? It's live. You can use it. But it is that, right? So it's a scaling solution. But a misconception that I've heard, which I find really interesting, is some people got the impression that Hydra is something that you connect to your stake pool, and it makes it 1,000 times faster, right? And it's I can get kind of why people get that impression, but before I explain what it is and sort of how it works, the 1,000,000 TPS metric that you quoted, right? Where did that come from? So initially, before the actual Hydra protocol was developed, there was research, right? Like all of this is based on research, peer-reviewed research that's published. You can go and look at the papers as well. Where some of the simulations estimated that, under certain conditions, a Hydra head would likely be able to run at least 1,000 transactions per second. And because Hydra heads, the real benefit of Hydra heads is that you can scale them up in parallel. So you can spin up multiple in parallel or sort of scale it horizontally. Which means that for every Hydra head you have open, you would have 1,000 TPS. So, the reasoning goes, if you have 1,000 of them, you would have 1,000,000 TPS, right? As potential throughput. But there's no cap to how many Hydra heads you can have open. And obviously, this was a simulation. This was before, a lot of the benchmarking was done. And the actual throughput for a single Hydra head depends on a multitude of factors. One of which is how complex is the transactions that you're running. So for the Hydra Doom thing, for example, we were running smart contract transactions. So we did a little bit of validation and we had a lot of data in each transaction. So we benchmarked the throughput to about 280 transactions per second per Hydra head. But again, you can spin up as many as you want in parallel. So as long as your application allows for that, the actual throughput is, uncapped, as it were. But the question is, well, a follow-up question is like, how does it actually work, right? It doesn't make your stake pool faster. Hydra is a layer 2 scaling solution that is quite unique in the space. It's not terribly similar to other things that people are familiar with, but a useful analogy is the Lightning Network, right, which is a state channel solution as well on Bitcoin. But the thing is, with Lightning, you could only have 2 people in a state channel, and you could only transfer Bitcoin. That's the only thing you can do. Whereas with Hydra, you can have multiple participants and you can execute smart contracts because it's isomorphic to the layer one. So you can run the same scripts, you can have different assets, you can have any Cardano native token in there that you want. So it's a lot more flexible than Lightning. So an analogy that to draw a parallel, something people are much more familiar with is rollups, right? So optimistic rollups or ZK rollups. But the thing about those is they are permanent, right? So once you sort of deploy it, it's kind of set in stone. It's not really, you can update it, through some mechanisms, but it's not something that you do particularly often. Whereas with a Hydra head, it's kind of intended to be opened. You do a bunch of stuff and then you close it down. So it's sort of intended to have a life cycle, right? That it starts and then it ends, which is super useful for a bunch of applications, especially something that needs to be a little bit more adaptable or a little bit more flexible, or that you can update, and because it has this sort of fixed life cycle, or intended fixed life cycle, something like a roll-up, you would never set the fees to be actually zero, because you would immediately be DDoSed and you wouldn't be able to update the network, and you would just have a really bad time. Whereas with something like Hydra, it's not intended to be forever, and you can control sort of who submits stuff into it anyway, so you can have literally zero fees when you do stuff in there.